Today's episode, I'll be talking to Rob Townley. There's a fascinating bit right near the end of the podcast where Rob's been working on recording the sound of plants and trees and building songs around it, and it is brilliant. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. So today I'm going to be talking to Rob Townley. Hi, Rob.
Hey, Vic. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Thanks for being here. So, Rob, traditional first question: what do you do?
What do I do? I'm a bit of a multitasker. So I'm a guitarist, a session guitarist as well. I'm also a soundscape artist, so I create soundscapes and musical backgrounds. And I'm also a music producer.
Cool. That sounds like fun. Right. So now, what I'm always interested in is obviously how things develop and stuff. So I'd like you to take you sort of back to what your early days of sort of growing up, and when did you realise that you had an interest in music for a start?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It might take quite a while to think of the answer to that because I'm not sure. I think I did the usual kind of thing at school where you learn an instrument, and mine was violin, which I kind of scraped through for a few grades.
I like when you said straight through.
Yeah, it was literally for a while. But I think what first got me started was I got a small classical type guitar, and I got hold of the famous Burt Whedon's Play in a Day book, and I started going through that, and that's when I kind of realised that hey, I can do this, and I actually enjoy it. It's really good. And then a few years I started late actually. I was probably early teens then. And then later in my teens, I actually won a guitar in a national newspaper competition.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that was great. It was a Fender Bullet. It was third prize.
Wow.
And it was like a cheaper Telecaster type guitar. It was still a Fender.
Yeah.
Once I had that and a little amplifier, then I was on my way. Really, it was just it was a spark that I needed to for the rest of my life. To be honest, so.
That's brilliant. So, what was the competition? Can you remember?
It was in the Daily Star.
Wow.
They even had them way back then. And I can't remember. I just went around to my neighbours and I said to them, look, there's a competition. Can you help me? Can you help me with the answers? And they helped me with some of the answers. I sent it off, and lo and behold, I got third prize. So yeah, be interesting to see actually who won first prize and what they're doing now, whether they're still continuing with music. That'd be quite an interesting thought.
No, that would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
I haven't come across anybody else who's won a prize like that. So that's so I don't know. I don't know the answer to that from that point of view. So, when you got that sort of fired you off. Now, I'm quite interested in this. Did you find that, however, traumatic, let's put it that way, the violin was, that it helped you when you started?
Yeah. Excuse the background noise, by the way. That's builders.
Yeah, sorry.
Some wood. Sorry, what was the question again, Vic?
Yeah, I was going to say, you said that you did a bit of violin. How much did that sort of set you up when you started playing guitar? That things were you sort of knew the groundwork, or was it just like you were starting again?
It was almost like I was starting again, because with the violin, I read music to a certain degree. So I could pick up little pieces of easy classical music and play my way through it. But with guitar, there wasn't a need to read music or carry that on that instrument. And to be honest, for me, there still hasn't been a need to do that. No. Even though a lot of professionals will read and find they have to read. But no, it was a complete U-turn, really. Even though it was musical, it was kind of starting from scratch on a different instrument, very much so.
That's interesting, that, because that, I think, for me, sort of earmarks the difference between, like, if you've had classical lessons and then you pick up another instrument, unless of course you're going to read on another instrument, that there's no crossover, particularly as it's a stringed instrument, which
you would think there'd be quite a lot of similarity, but trying to read music for guitar is quite a bit different than for a violin.
Tell me about it.
If you ever tried it,
it's a nightmare.
I've tried it a couple of times in my career, but I haven't had to for work. It was just out of interest. I thought, right, maybe it's a time in my life where I started to read music, and I've got a couple of books upstairs, and those books upstairs are still as new. I've kind of got through the first couple of pages, and I thought, am I really going to use all this knowledge if I spend hours and hours using it? And I'm yet to come to a point where I really need to learn to read music. So,
there's a couple of interesting stories about that, because, I get that totally, because I think what happens with guitar, it's got all of the limitations for reading music that all the other instruments have got, plus some more. It's like, where do you want to play that note? That note, like on the piano, I'd be like, well, that note's there. But on the guitar, it's like, and all the combinations of notes change as you move around because the tuning changes and everything. And then, of course, if you're playing another tuning, you forget it, can't you? Because all the notes are in a completely different place.
Exactly.
So,
great fun.
That's it. So, I've sort of been intrigued by that, about reading music, because I did it for classical. But even then, you never felt that you were really on it like a sax player could be, or whatever. But again, with the sax player, that's your only way in, isn't it? Because it's like you can't see a diagram of anything or whatever.
So for a lot of classical musicians as well, that's what they do. They read music, but I think it's interesting, because I think there's a danger with being tied to reading sheet music, is that you actually learn to break away from that. I knew a friend years ago who was classically trained pianist, but if you took the music away from her, she'd sit there and say, well, I don't know what to do.
Oh yeah.
Because, you suddenly, it's like you've taken away my structure, so what am I going to do, kind of thing. So I'm very much I always like to encourage people to do their own thing, find their own sounds, be unique on their instrument, because that's what we're made for, after all. There's so many people trying to copy or trying to be like someone else, and for me it's never worked. Even when I started taking guitar a lot more seriously, I went to GIT in London, did a few weeks there, did quite a lot of study to a certain degree, and then I left the study at a certain level because I didn't want to be pigeonholed. I didn't want to copy somebody else or be like anybody else. I learned kind of basic theory for the guitar, so I knew my scales and I knew chords and I could get around like that. But after learning all that, I kind of decided that I don't want too much more knowledge, because I quite like the idea of picking up the instrument and not really knowing what's going to happen next, as opposed to having everything in my mind for the whole instrument. It's nice to have that. What if I go here? What's it going to sound like? Because if you get that preconception, then you're not going to go there, because, I know what that sounds like. I know what that sounds like. And so you end up being stuck rather than just exploring and experimenting.
I totally agree with that, because if you think about it, music reading and emulating something that has been written by somebody else is only a very new thing in the history of humans. Because music reading, let's take it back, 14th century. So for the rest of the time before that, people were playing by ear, and obviously in most other cultures they still play by ear. So they'll have a tradition or whatever. But so as you say, that what you were saying about making, the guitar is obviously one of the great creative instruments.
Yeah.
And the problem is, and I can see this in education, you've really hit this nail on the head here. We are now learning the guitar in a college and all the rest of it, like you would learn a classical instrument. you're going to learn this song by so and so, note for note, and all the rest of it. Whereas, of course, when you started off, like if you had the Burt Wheaton book of that sort of generation, you had to work things out. It was really difficult to find the stuff, and you had to sort of make mistakes and explore an idea. And I think that's where we've gone wrong with guitar now. We've got a lot of sort of technical people, but they don't really know what they've got to say musically.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when I first started, I had lessons as well. A few years before I went to GIT, there was a really good local guitarist that I teamed up with, and he gave me a few lessons. So I learned the usual Stairway to Heaven and some Eagles stuff and stuff like that. But it was only to a certain degree. When I started looking into where do I want to go next with what I'm learning, I never had the desire to learn a Slash guitar solo or a Satriani guitar solo or work this out or work that out. I was more, once I got to that point, what I was thinking was, I want to sound like myself. Why do I want to spend time learning what Slash has done when I can do something new? I can now do something different.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's, if I ever get invited to a party and someone says, "Oh, we've got a guitar, can you play us a tune?" I always say, "No, I can't. I can make something up if you want, but I don't know anything to learn. I've never learned any songs to play around a campfire. I just don't have the interest in doing that. I'd rather create something different." That's always been my kind of outlook on it, really.
Well, it's funny actually you say that, because I did an interview yesterday. It was the other way around, because I was being interviewed, right? And and the guy who was interviewing me, I have interviewed, and he sort of plays the kora, the African stringed instrument, and he plays guitar as well. And it was like, well, we come along and play some songs. It's like, okay, I'm going to have to really quickly rearrange these songs that I normally play in a band to work out what I'm going to be able to do here, because it was a bit like, and plus he might jam with me. So it's like, okay, but of course, if you're a creative player, you can do that, because you just sort of think, okay, we'll do that, but there's no, we're only going to do 2 verses or whatever, or do this, and you can just sort of change things around and whatever. And it's interesting that if you come out at the point of like, no, I'm going to play this song now by whoever it is, you're stuck. It's really difficult to unwind that unless you've, and it's something that you said actually, but I was going to pick up on. If you understand like the structure or the map or whatever it is about a song, that you can go, yeah, here's the chords, I got them, and I know what key we're in. But then everything else is up for grabs. You don't have to worry what happened at bar 13 or whatever, because it can be something else. You've got much more flexibility. And I don't think that's how things have been taught, because I'm seeing people who can do the solo by so-and-so, and you think that must have taken you months, hours to learn. And unfortunately, you just sound like the original. Well, you don't actually, you sound like a copy. But which is a bit disappointing. So could you actually take that solo and twist it around and make your own one up? And in a lot of cases, they can't, because that's not how it's done.
I spend a good fair share of time on YouTube. Just look, if I've got nothing to do one evening, I'll just have a flip through videos and things like that and look at certain things. And often I'll land on a guitarist page when they're doing this, and the technicality of these guys is just astonishing. But a lot of the time I'm kind of thinking, well, where's the individuality in this? You've played me a million notes in the last 2 bars,
exactly.
But you could have taken out 999,000 of those and 999 and left just the one, which made a much bigger statement than the million you were trying to cram in. I don't know. I think we're in an era of YouTube stars as well, where people think they've got to be flash, they've got to be flamboyant, they've got to be better than the next guy in order to get themselves noticed and get the likes and the followers up. And that's a bit of a shame, really.
It is.
We've lost a little bit of individuality in that.
That's absolutely right. It's created its own sort of monster. I sort of thought, well, there's always been the bedroom guitar player that was absolutely incredible, but you never saw them because they never left their bedroom.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
unfortunately now they've been unleashed upon the world. So you've got a load of people who could do things, but they probably couldn't even be in a band because those sort of characters don't gel very well. I was talking to somebody the other day and he came up with the term Uber musician, which I thought was really good, which is that sort of modern, I'll do, my 1 minute Instagram thing, which is sort of blinding, and
Yeah.
But what's that about? It's like a party
Yeah,
trick.
yeah.
I'm a bit concerned about this because I don't think that, it's the way we
Yeah,
should.
and the danger of that as well is you get other people watching it thinking, "Oh, I can't. I'm never going to make that level."
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
and
exactly.
I felt like even myself, I felt like that a couple of times. You see something, you think, "Good grief," And a few
Yeah, yeah,
years ago, it would have really phased me. I know it might have put me off practicing for a while, thinking, "I've got no hope. I can't compete against this guy. He is phenomenal."
no, exactly.
Now
But
I can use the
I've
stuff
even
that's
heard
been
people
done.
like I've heard people like I think it might have been John Etheridge actually say that sort of thing. It's like all these people out there could do all this stuff, and it's like, oh my god. I think he made a remark something like, "Oh, is that how Wes Montgomery did that?" type of thing.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
somebody sort of worked out all of that, and you think, well, but these guys aren't doing anything. They're not out there, you know, making
No,
music
that's
really.
just supporting the trend. So luckily these days I can shrug stuff like I can shrug that off quite easily.
Yeah,
I can watch something and think, yeah, fair play, that's phenomenal, and then not let it bother me because I'm quite happy and content with the level I'm at as a musician and where I'm heading with that.
mm.
And that doesn't phase me, but it used to, especially when you're starting up and you're
Oh
trying to
god,
learn.
yeah, no, I
It's
know.
like,
Especially
oh,
when you're younger, I think that is the thing.
yeah, yeah,
Because
it
I
can be a
mean,
massive blow, yeah.
obviously, you start off with this sort of unrealistic sense of reality, don't you?
Yeah,
Which you need because otherwise you just wouldn't go out and do anything. But if you get that knocked seriously a lot, then you would just give up, which I
yeah,
think is what
yeah,
you're saying. You're getting a lot of people being put
yeah.
off by the.
You only need to look at the comments on some of the videos and people saying, "That's it, I give up. I give up." All in good taste, of course. But
Yeah,
um,
yeah. So how long then? When you started off, you won your prize. So that must have been a real incentive to think that you won something like that because it's like some sort of affirmation that you should be playing guitar if
well,
you won
yeah,
a
yeah,
competition.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Did it get you like that? You thought, I've got to do this now because I've won it.
Um, it wasn't like that really. It was just the next step for me. It's like now I've got an electric, great. I can make a
Yeah,
noise and I can express myself a bit more then, and maybe I can get in a band. So I kind of learnt as much as I could and applied for a couple of bands locally, which I didn't get in. And then I just kept working on stuff until I kind of joined a band with my friends, and we were all unemployed at the time. And this was back in the days where you could be unemployed for months and no one would notice or care less. So we managed to spend quite a lot of time doing that, but we never really found a singer that would fit in with us, and so that kind of fell apart. And it was after that period that I kind of think, right, I'm going to go to GIT. I'm going to increase my skills and take myself to a different level, which it did do. And then from there on, I kind of didn't do much after that, really. A couple of bands and projects after that. But what happened to me was, and I think this is probably early to mid 90s now, we're talking, was that I started to get really disillusioned with the music business because back then it was all about getting a record deal. That was it. You just lived for that. If you didn't have that, that was it. You didn't have a chance to do anything. And so in some of the bands I was in, we met up with many record companies. One band I was in, we went to visit 13 record companies in London. We did a big showcase gig for them in London, which they all came to. But through all that process and understanding what these guys are like and what the industry was like, I ended up hating it. I was really bitter about it. And then when that band split up, I just kind of felt that I just don't want to be a part of this anymore. I really don't want to be a part of this anymore. So I had a big break. I had a big break from playing. I couldn't hardly pick up the guitar. I couldn't listen to music because it would remind me of the kind of gift that I had. And then I started feeling bitter again, you know, that I couldn't do it. I wasn't able to do it because the record business was shutting me down. I wasn't going to look good enough. I wasn't going to be good enough to fit in with the record business and all that kind of thing. So I had quite a long break from it, to be honest. And it was only years later I had this kind of call it, you know, not being too heavy, but I had this kind of divine calling where I just felt that, come on, what are you made? What are you made to do? Who are you?
Yeah.
And I really had that light bulb
Bit of an
moment.
epiphany.
Yeah. I've got to start playing guitar again. I've got to do it again, but this time not focusing on the record deal. Just do it because that's who you are, really.
That's interesting you should say that, because I think that is something that is really important. It's that idea of realizing that you have a purpose as a being.
Yeah.
You know, I come to a similar point from a slightly different perspective from you in that regard. But there's, you know, even there's a sort of like a Platonic thing of the in fact, James Hillman, the psychologist, wrote about this and said, he called it the seed theory. You know, it's this idea that, or the acorn theory, I think he called it. You know, everything becomes the thing that it is, but we sort of don't realize what we are, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's that thing of finding who you are. You know, what type of being are you?
Yeah.
Because we've had a lot of time with people telling us what we're supposed to be, you see.
Yeah.
So as you say, when that happened to you, how did that happen to you? Because I think everybody has a different experience of it.
Yeah, it was kind of not being too heavy, but it was kind of a God moment where I just had these little clues would appear. I'd pick up a magazine and it was an article about warriors picking up their swords again because they'd left their weapons behind in battle, and years later they had to pick up their sword again and do what they were driven to do, what their purpose was. And I kind of thought, wow, you know, because the guitar is often called an axe, and I thought, and I really felt that, you've got to pick up your weapon, you've got to pick up this thing again. And there was a couple of other things that fell into place around the same time where I really got this strong feeling, no, I've really got to do this again. But I also thought, I'm never going to be happy, I'm never going to be fulfilled unless I do this. You know, you're talking about education earlier, and it's a fact that it's in the region of 80% of your creativity is stripped out during the schooling process.
And I think to be quite honest, that's probably an understatement, because I've seen people just lose the skill that they had in something because they were trained to do it properly.
Yeah, we're all driven to be academic these days. You know, you need these grades, you need these results, you need to go to university and study this. I know various younger people who have been to uni, come out of uni, and they're out of work, wandering around what to do with their lives. You know, because it's like, we've done all that.
And I've also met people who didn't go to uni, who have become the top in the field that they went into, against all the people who'd been in university.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So I think we've got to rethink the nonsense of that, because the education system is a self-perpetuating money machine. And I'm in education, right?
Yeah.
But it is a self-perpetuating money machine.
Yeah.
This idea that if you're not good enough to do something, you need to take more qualifications in order to be, anything.
Yeah. We do live in a kind of matrix where we're driven and we're herded to be part of the system, which means, be academic, get a good job, get into loads of debt, have credit cards, have a mortgage, have this, and so you're tied and roped into that system. And this, you would notice quite clearly that the government and the system that we live in doesn't favour creatives. It's not built around people being creative and being free and having freedom of expression, which tells you, pretty good clue that maybe we should rebel against that a little bit.
Oh,
You know,
we should. We should a lot. Actually.
Yeah, we are all unique after all.
Yeah.
Everyone is completely unique, and I believe everyone does have gifts and talents in the creative field. It's just that a lot of the time we will never see it because people go on to be accountants, lawyers, solicitors, bankers, etc., and then they come to the end of their lifespan, and you just think, "Oh, I wonder what you could have done if you'd have pursued music or you pursued art. What you would have created. It would have been amazing, you know."
Well, the fact is, a lot of these people aren't happy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, there's a friend of mine who's a really fabulous flautist. Actually said, he quoted some, I can't remember who it was, but he was the one who said this to me, that he said, governments don't like dreamers.
Yeah.
Because dreamers come up with ideas.
Yeah, there you go.
And, you know, he said there's very good reason why the Chinese government, you know, historically, not just in communism, but in various other, you know, aspects of its dynasties and stuff, if there was a problem with, you know, the fear of revolt, they would always lock up the poets and artists first.
Yeah.
And you
we
think,
are troublemakers after all.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing because these people aren't thinking, you know, in a way, it's exactly what the church did about heresy. If you said something that was slightly not to the script,
yeah,
then that was bad, right? And of course, this is one of the reasons, going back to the thing about music reading, why music was written. Because church music had to be, you couldn't do anything heretical. It had to be written down. It had to be sanctioned by the church. And the only way you could do that was to write music down.
Yeah, and that had to be controlled as well.
Totally. That's why it was written down. And then you get the idea that to be a proper musician, you had to read music and so on.
Yeah.
You know, you couldn't.
There's a great story of the Catholic Church banning the flat five because it was like deemed to be like demonic and stuff like that. Yeah. But
well, of course, it sounded Arabic. If you think about like the harmonic minor scale, the reason you couldn't use the harmonic minor scale and you weren't allowed to use the augmented second interval, which was a papal edict, actually stopped you using that in a melody because it sounds Arabic.
It's mad, isn't it? But truth be known, the monks before used to chant all these things, and they used to get whacked on it. They used to get high on this stuff because it was taken them to a higher level. But the Catholic Church went, we're not having that, you know. No. And now when you hear the flat five, you kind of associate it with demonic metal music because it's got that real dark sound. But to be honest, that sound and those frequencies go way back before any metal music ever existed.
Oh, of course it does. Yeah. Yes, it's inherent in most Eastern European music and
yeah, absolutely.
You know, Eastern music generally. Yeah.
Right.
So when you sort of picked up on that, I'd like to sort of focus on that thing about, you know, the record company stuff and all that sort of nonsense that we all went through because I had that as well.
Yeah.
Where you sort of are suddenly beholden to somebody turning around again. Yep. Yeah. You know, contracts on the table. And then obviously you then had to go through the sort of thing of selling your soul before you could sign it. And in its own way, of course, that was problematic then. To be a rebel against the system was actually really quite tricky then because it was difficult to get your message out. Although there were a couple of bands who succeeded to do that, and then they got signed up by a record company. I think Metallica was one of them. It was either Metallica or Iron Maiden. I think it was Iron Maiden, actually. They sold so many cassettes, as it was then, off the back pages of Kerrang, that they actually were then taken very seriously by record companies.
God,
I'm pretty sure it was Iron Maiden. Yeah, I know. So there was even then a way of generating a way
that was hard work, man. And
that was hard work.
Most of us back then, you wouldn't entertain the thought of trying to do that because you were still blinkered by record company. You need a record company.
Unless, of course, you were in the punk era, because that was the thing about punk. It was you did it yourself, and if you could get a record company to throw money at you, well, great.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm just
yeah,
wondering, because obviously we went through a little bit of golden period where that was possible with technology without the record company. And now it's a bit like, well, we've got back into this sort of nonsense of things like Spotify and stuff like that. So
yeah.
it's sort of, we get this little golden moment, don't we?
And that, yeah, and now everyone can do it. So I set up my own record label, cost me 25 quid, and I release music around the world. So, and it's interesting to it, well, it's interesting because it's good and bad, isn't it? It's kind of given everybody the opportunity to get their music out there. And the bad thing is it's given everybody the opportunity to get their music out there.
Exactly.
Right. So now we're saturated with good and bad stuff. We've got authentic artists who are really trying their best to try and to make a career out of music, to get followers, to get sales, and to progress and to be recognized. And then you've got kind of other people who are just trying to get as many likes as they can, trying to get as many followers, and this, that, and the other. So it's hard to separate the good stuff from the bad stuff, but ultimately I think it's great. I think it's great to have that freedom to be able to do what you want and release it where you want. And the reward is, whilst the reward might not be monetary, because there's very little in it unless you can really hit big sales, the reward for me has been just knowing that someone on the other side of the world who I don't know has been listening to some of my music, for example, and that's just amazing. And that fact alone is encouragement.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm thinking here, because I think you've sort of uncovered something that's really interesting.
Yeah.
There was a time that musicians obviously didn't make recordings, and a time that they couldn't even create sheet music. So what did they do? Because I think there is something in the old idea of what a musician or an artist was, which probably could give us some clues about what we could do now. Not necessarily going back to be like a troubadour, I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
But there's something in them, in the mindset of what it is and what you do, that might be quite interesting for people. Because obviously the whole point about this podcast is about exploring the possibilities for creatives to create, and for some people to make money, or to make something that, it doesn't have to be, a lot. It just needs to be something that adds to what it is that you do. A bit like the Etsy shop.
Yeah.
You don't set up your Etsy shop in order to give up your day job in working for, Citibank or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's the idea of how that all fits together, which again, I would have said, if you went back to sort of like, I know this is a wrong term, but Middle Ages, you know what I mean? People did a lot of things probably. You might have had a skill. You might have been the blacksmith, but you may have had other skills as well. You might not have just been that one trick pony.
Yeah, I think you're right. Actually, thinking of it, I think those things would have been valuable, wouldn't they? You would serve the community in many ways.
Mm.
You might be a really good blacksmith, but you also might be a very good archer, for example.
Yes.
So you might be called on in battle and times like that to defend your town or whatever it might be. And then you would also have the skill of, you might be prepared to play a musical instrument as well and do all sorts of things. I think it's probably far more community based than it is now.
I think so. And I think, you see, there are a couple of very interesting things. That one of them was a book by a guy called Jacques Attali called Noise. And he predicted the rise of the CD player, and then the complete collapse of the music industry about 10 to 15 years before the CD happened.
Yeah.
Because he was a musician and an economist and a politician, actually, in the end, in France. And the book is fascinating because he was saying, look, it's about supply and demand. And of course, once you can supply the things, because of obviously computers, you could see that that was coming. And then it'd be possible to record your stuff. The initial impact of that would be that the people who could do the things and get it to market quickly would make a lot of money, which is exactly what happened. You know, the Rolling Stones and Dire Straits and all the rest of it did very well. And Phil Collins and all that lot in that early CD boom, because it was cheaper to produce the stuff. But then as soon as everybody got to be able to record, you got more supply than there was demand. And then, of course, we got the situation we got now. But the interesting thing was, he said, historically, music and the arts go to those places that the economy follows afterwards.
Okay.
So he said, then the next thing would be newspapers and books, which is exactly what happened. And of course, what happens then is they have to find their own niche. What is it that can still exist? Because it doesn't disappear.
Yeah.
You know, the idea of selling CDs or records or whatever, it doesn't disappear. It just changes its nature, you know. So I'm looking at that and thinking, well, that's one of the things I think it's really important to look at. That maybe there's something that we could learn from that.
Yeah, I can kind of see it coming around again as well, because you know, the record companies are starting to take control of entities like Spotify, for example. And so in 10 years' time, are we going to find that there's more control over what we can do? So is it going to go full back circle so that the big corporations will have control over everything and start charging or limiting? I don't know. Hopefully not. But there are signs that that's already starting to happen a little bit, because they've got to find ways to make money. So they're going to, well, we'll buy up Spotify and we'll buy up this platform and this platform. So then now we can have control again. Yeah, interesting times ahead, I think.
Yeah, it is. That is interesting.
Yeah.
So with your, let's go back to, you know, you start with the guitar again, and you realise that this time you've got a different. I'm guessing here you've got a different perspective, instead of it that you're chasing after the elusive star of stardom, literally. You've now got a sort of a purpose where you're thinking, no, this is what I'm here to do. Yeah. I'm here to create music. So what's your first thing that you start doing then?
Just trying to recollect.
Because it's an interesting thing that you start again. How do you start?
Yeah, it is.
It doesn't have to be the exact thing, but, you know, what is it roughly that you sort of put your foot back in the water again and thought, okay.
I don't know really. I started playing at lots of, I used to go to quite a lot of church groups and things like that at the time. Okay. So I started integrating more with friends and associates who were in those circles, and I felt this is a good way for me to.
Yeah. So that was your way. That's your way back in.
Kind of.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Kind of a little bit like that. Yeah. It was kind of right. Okay, I can serve this instead of meeting up with my mates on a Thursday night. Actually, should I bring my guitar along and try playing something? And so I gradually started doing more things like that and getting involved with people and groups in that way. And through that, it connected me to other people who were able to offer me more opportunities. And from there, I kind of started branching out into doing my own stuff. Once I got kind of, I quickly got my guitar level back to what it was in the old record company aspiration days. That didn't take long, and then I found not longer I was kind of superseding that and getting better and better, which was really encouraging. And from there, I kind of had the realization that maybe I could start doing my own music using maybe guitars as a tool, which would be something different. I had this kind of desire to pioneer something, to create a sound that probably hadn't been heard before. So I just started just getting into guitar pedals and effects and things like that. And from there, I found that I had this sound that I hadn't heard anywhere else. It was really ambient, ethereal, atmospheric sound. And I kind of thought, well, I could do this. I could do this for myself. And a couple of people said, oh, you remind me of Mike Oldfield. And I hadn't really thought of myself as an artist at the time. But the more I chewed it over, I thought, well, maybe I could do something like that. Maybe what's to stop me? You know, what's to stop me? We're now in a digital age that is coming upon us. What's to stop me releasing my own stuff? If this sound is interesting and people like it, then maybe there's something in that. So I just started working on ideas and eventually started releasing music, which has brought on quite a good following. Lots of people really interested in what I do. So I've managed to pioneer this sound over the last few years of generating that.
How would you describe your sound? That's a bit of a tricky thing to ask.
Yeah, it's like an ambient soundscape. So it's like a soundtrack, but it's between us. If you imagine combining the words soundtrack and landscapes, you end up with soundscape. It's almost like this ambient sound, which I don't like doing anything too complicated. So I use a lot of loops. So I just generate this sound which kind of evolves around and round. And what I found when I started doing that, it almost took you up into this different place. It's almost like it takes you out of your current bubble of concentration or being, so to speak. Not getting too really new agey about it, but it just took you to a different place.
Well, the thing about loops, because the repetition thing.
Yeah.
If you look at sort of trance, well, obviously trance music, but stuff that happens in cultures where they induce trance by dance and sound, it is often that sort of thing of something that just goes and loops on itself.
Yeah.
And that is a very important thing in music. And again, that is something that I suppose you could point at people like Ravel and go, well, you know, the bolero is something like that, where it just goes, it's the same thing and it's going around and around.
What I also found, if you want to go theoretical about it, is that I don't like things to resolve. So I tend to create this loop, but it doesn't go at the end of the loop. It kind of goes round. And while people might be expecting it to resolve, because it doesn't, you find you get caught up in it a lot more. So you end up, I don't know, you just,
which again is like Indian music, isn't it? It's that sort of timeless thing where you can listen to something and you don't realize how long you've listened to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I remember going to see John McLaughlin. He had this Indian thing called Shakti. And of course the playing was just like, but he was playing along with, there was him and a group of other Indian musicians, somebody, L. Shankar, who's related to Ravi Shankar on violin, and these amazing sort of percussion players, something on tablas and something on something called a bhutan. And, between them, that music never, as you say, never resolves, because you haven't got that draw that happens with harmonic, the Western harmony, where you've got a cadence coming up type of thing. Yeah. And it was amazing. And before I went to see this, it was actually my art teacher. He'd already seen Shakti, and he said the concert was like, it was difficult to work out how long you were in there listening to it. It was like a 2-hour concert, but it felt like it was difficult to work it out. Like, was I in there for half an hour, or was I? Yeah,
it almost transcends time and space.
It does.
That's too dramatic about that, but it's
no, it does. No,
you
it
can
does.
actually get lost so much that you come out of it and you think, God, that's 40 minutes I've been listening to that.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's the thing, what you're saying about this thing about loops. I think that is something.
Yeah, so I like using, I like doing loops, a lot of repetition as well. So, but I also like doing polyrhythm. So if you've got a repetition that's going in 4/4, I love adding a 5/4 over that, because then you get that tubular bells effect where something comes round, and then because it doesn't match up, it starts on a different note, and then it starts again. And then the next time round, it starts on the third note, and eventually it'll resolve, and then it'll start disappearing again.
I got a feeling that Frank Zappa used to do things like this, where he used to get.
I'd imagine he did.
Yeah, they're always. It was like total chaos, and then suddenly it became.
Yeah.
And then it would dissolve again because everybody was playing something slightly different time-wise.
Yeah,
but only Frank would. Yeah. Well,
Frank. Yeah. Only Frank. I think. I don't think anyone else ever since has just. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible.
I love that. I love that danger as well. Let's just twist something. We've got. It doesn't have to be all nice and fluffy. Let's just twist something a little bit and see what happens. Because I also experiment a lot in frequencies and tuning, which we can come to in a moment.
Yeah, cool. So you could never have done that with a record label unless it was your own.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because they think, is it rock and roll? No.
Yeah. People aren't going to listen to this. Yeah.
No, that's right. That's right. So you get back in you with the church stuff. So you obviously started to build up your confidence as well.
Yeah.
You got your playing back, and then it more than it was before. What little landmarks are there then where you go, and then I did that, and that gave me what have you got?
I don't think there are any landmarks. I think it was a gradual, and it's gradual.
Yeah.
I'm talking over many years, really. Yeah. It's just a gradual increase of playing, being recognised, but not from a, oh, well, aren't you great? But just, oh, Rob's good. He can do the job. Do you want to come play with us? Or we've heard about you. Hey, we'd like to try you on this. And so just gradual increase of getting to know people, collaborating, getting involved in groups and events and things like that. And then there was one pivotal moment which has led me into my role as a producer, which I'm in now, and that was that.
Right, we had a little bit of a blip there, so depending on how well I do with the editing.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So as you were, Rob.
Yeah. Okay. I do remember one time where. There was a kind of a dramatic lead into my current position of being a music producer. Yeah. Because over the past 20 years, whilst my music was still kind of going upwards and going in a good direction, I was a self-employed web designer. So when I more or less had enough of the music business, I just thought, well, what else am I going to do in my life? And I started doing a bit of graphic design work and stuff like that. And eventually I kind of got into web design and I went self-employed. So that covers kind of a 20-year period whilst the music was increasing. But it got to a period probably about 3-4 years ago where so many people are learning how to web design and do stuff like that themselves these days. There's kind of the amount of work dropped down considerably. And it got to a point where I was really kind of desolate with, what am I going to do now? There's virtually no work. I just don't know what to do. So I started looking on job boards and I thought, I don't really want to work for a company. I've been self-employed for so long. I'm not really that person anymore. And so I was just flipping through. There's nothing really interesting. And just out of the blue, I thought, I'll just search for musicians wanted on this job board and see if anything comes up. And I wasn't expecting anything. On the first couple of pages, there was nothing. It was the usual kind of, musicians wanted for cruise ship or musicians wanted for a party and things like that. Nothing that. Oh, you still with me?
Yeah, it's all right. I can hear you. Your pictures.
Yeah. Frozen. I just checked my. I've got green lights on at the moment, so it's all right.
Okay.
So yeah, and the usual stuff came up, and then suddenly I saw this advert saying session musicians wanted. So I thought that's unusual on a job board. So I clicked on it, and it said session musicians wanted for a local studio, and it was literally 10 miles down the road from me.
Oh, well, that's Crikey, that's bizarre.
in this village, and I just thought there was no recording studio there. I've never heard of anything like that. So instantly I went into panic mode. I was like, quick, I've got to answer. So I sent them a message, and sure enough, that it was a recording studio linked to a music company, kind of a Christian music company as well, even though they did a broad selection of artists and music. And I just thought, this is too good to be true. This is ridiculous. So I ended up going down to the studio for a meeting. Little did I know they were going to hand me an acoustic guitar and say, play something. And as we mentioned before, I said, well, I don't know anything, but I can make something up. So I made something up, and they seemed to enjoy that. And they said, right, here's an electric. We got this track. Do you mind if we just plug you in the desk, see what you can do on this track? I thought, right, okay. So they gave me half an hour to kind of listen to it and jot some chords down. And then I went, plugged into the desk and kind of frantically scrambled some ideas down, which none of which would have ever been usable. But they probably realized that I was pretty excited about the opportunity. And I had an introduction with them, and they said, okay, thanks, we'll be in touch. So I left thinking, what on earth? Was that like one of these kind of divine moments in your life where people are brought together for some apparent reason? And I had to wait about 2 months or so throughout Christmas and the New Year to actually get a response from them, which was, yeah, we like you, we'd like to start working with you. And so from then I started traveling down to the studio, doing sessions and things like that. And so I did that for a couple of years, just on and off sessions I'd required. But then they kind of said, well, do you fancy learning a bit about production? And I thought, I'm not sure, because in my mind I thought, I'm a guitarist. No, I'm not gonna deviate. I'm a proud guitarist. That was still a little bit in me. But I said, yeah, I'll give it a go. And so they gave me some drums to edit and some things to try working on, which was a complete mess after I worked on it with my inexperience. So I made a right mess of things. But slowly they said, yeah, you're getting a bit better at this. And they gave me tips and hints and encouraged me. And it got to the point where I now do work for them, kind of production work for them, producing tracks for some of their artists. And now I managed to get production work off my own back as well, which is really good. And I really enjoy it because it's still being creative. I still get to play guitar on some of the tracks, but it's that whole realm of being a creative person and think, well, I've got a track. All they sent me is vocals and some acoustic guitar, and I'm free to do what I want with it, to turn it into what I think is going to be good. And that's fantastic because it's really an amazing position to be in. So yeah, that was the main kind of moment that's brought me up to where I am now, I think.
See, that sort of, when you look at something and you go like, that is just so weird.
Yeah.
But these happen quite a lot in these podcasts where people tell you things and you think, that's a bit strange.
Yeah.
There's one, it was another guitarist, interestingly. He said he'd just come off a tour, because he was, I think he'd come to the end of working with this particular band, And he said, I was in London. I just literally got back. I was walking down the street in London. Now, he lives in, I don't know, Hastings or somewhere like that, or did. And coming the other way was another guy who lives in Hastings, in London, and says, oh, hello. He says, I was only thinking about you. There's a band looking for a guitar player. He said, would you be interested? And he went, I've got no work. He said, okay, they're going to be doing a, whatever it is, a 6-month tour of Europe.
Yeah.
And you go like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And this is not, that's just one example, but there are lots of them.
Yeah.
And you sort of go, well, how does that? I don't think there's any explanation to that. So it's just, you just have to park it out there. It's a mystery, right?
Well, there is. I do have an explanation for it, and I think I've looked at the thing, something called the law of attraction,
Yeah.
a little bit, whereby you basically frame up who you want to be and what you want to happen in your life, and then the universe will attract likewise things in the universe that will coincide, and it's proven to work. It's proven that you kind of, it's almost if by framing that up, you're broadcasting to the world, you're broadcasting to the frequencies around you that this is what I want to be, this is what I want to attract. And for some reason, it kind of draws things in that are likewise into your surroundings. It's really hard to explain.
Well, it is, and the thing is that there are lots of explanations similar to that, but you know, they're different, but they come to the same sort of thing, that whether, you know, it's a mirror and you see what it is that you are at that point in time. And once you start to frame something else, it starts to reflect it back to you. So therefore the opportunities appear. That's another way of looking at it. And then there, you know, but they're basically all sort of saying that there's an interaction between the world, the universe, and you. And, and the problem is, because we've gone down this sort of very sort of left-brained, everything's very rational sort of thing, we've lost sight of that. But because we just ignore anything that we can't explain. And I've been listening to a lot of work of Ian McGilchrist, who's the scientist who does the stuff about the two sides of the brain. And basically saying we've got two brains, you know. And that the thing is that his take on this, you know, because I don't think we could ever really know, because it's sort of unknowable, is that we've gone down this sort of route of wanting everything to be rational and well, there's one part of the brain that does the big picture, and it's that one that seems to be when you get those moments where you get these weird synchronicities happening. And you start to see, of course, once you see them, you start seeing them everywhere.
Yeah, you start to recognize, you start to become familiar with it, which is good.
Yeah, which goes back to that story that you told before about the, I think it was when you were talking about the guitar, when you started to, you know, things started to fall into place, and you thought, oh, that's a bit odd. You know, they're picking up the sword. That's where you use
yeah. But there's definitely a divine. It depends how you want to look at it. You can also look at it from the faith point of view, where, you know, I know many people who've had what you would call chance meetings with other people that have led to new career changes and this, that, and the other. And there's definitely some God moments in that. I met up with a friend of mine a few months ago who said that they went on holiday to somewhere in Scotland, and they stayed in this. They couldn't find anywhere to stay for one night, so they thought, you know what, let's treat ourselves. Let's stay in this really expensive kind of castle. Let's stay here for one night and treat ourselves. So they did that, and it turned out that the owner was really interested in what his wife was practicing in a holistic, and they want her to set up a whole European holistic centre there. And it's all come together, and they've moved up to Scotland. Yeah. And it's just, what? You just think, There can only be some divine power behind that chance meeting. Well, it's not a chance meeting in that respect. No. It's kind of been orchestrated. Yes. It's just so bizarre that you would never in your wildest dreams think that would happen.
Now, would you say that is more, there's more potentiality in that if you're dealing with things that are artistic? Because what I'm suggesting is how possible is the accountant or the whatever going to find something that works for his accounts? If you get my drift, we're looking at one.
I do. Yeah, I think if you look at it from a faith perspective, or if you look at it from a law of attraction perspective, I think it can work for any situation, because the law is the same It's just about framing up what you want to happen. If it's something, even if it's something that you're an accountant and you think, I really need a solution to do these end of month payroll things because it's not working out.
Yeah, but that, you see, that's an un-accountancy like thought. The accountancy, the logical thought is, no, we do that and I do this. It's almost that you have to do the thing that is not the logical thing, or you have to cast something out there.
Maybe then you have to use that part of your brain that you wouldn't normally use from an academic purpose. You're now tapping into
that's what I'm suggesting.
Brain. Yeah, I think you could be right. You're now tapping into a different area of your brain, which is actually let's go supernatural with this thought process from now on. Let's not be academic and rules and structures. Let's scrap all that and go. Let's go supernatural. Let's go beyond what is rational in my thoughts and my thought process and how I'm going to frame this up. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
I did using different brain waves or something like that.
Yeah, well, I did an interview very early on with a guy called Andreas Kornvall, and this guy is a storyteller, and he's very good at like the Norse sagas. And he was saying one of the problems that we have is that, you know, we got this thing about logic, you know, in other words, the logos in the Greek thing of logic. He said, but see, the Greeks didn't do things in just that way. He said, because what they did was they had logic, logos, for that. And then for the thing that they knew was unknowable, they had mythos. And you had the two. You didn't just have logic. But you see, what we've done is we've just ended up with logic. And the problem is that it can't answer things that are unknowable. And I thought that was fascinating, because we've done this with a lot of things. We've done this with politics and the idea of democracy. You know, our idea of democracy is not the same as the Greek idea of democracy at all. You know, it's just an idea that we've sort of spun off it. And it's intriguing that, you know, that they had that sorted much better than us. That there was a point in time you can't do that with this. You just got to go off and do something that's much more mythic and much more, you know, unknowable. You know,
it's like a conversation between Captain Kirk and Dr. Spock, isn't it? Spock's just Kirk's say, right, I got this great idea, and Spock, it's illogical. It's like does not compute. You know, you can't do that, and it's quite funny. I think it's
yeah. But I think that's where we are with the things like you're saying with, you know, whether it's a different frequency or just a different way of thinking or just a different frame or just how
interesting.
You know. And I think this is really important. Now, you've got some interesting projects that you're doing, haven't you, with regard to like the natural world?
This is another thing that's kind of, I'm just trying to think how I was led to get involved in this thing, really. Because throughout my kind of adventures, let's call it, in kind of doing my own ambient soundtracks and music and stuff like that, I do a lot of frequency changing as well. So I don't stick to 440. I might tune in 432 or 444 or something else, depending on how I'm feeling. And I do have a lot of research on this as well. So I dig deep into lots of theories regarding tunings and hertz and frequencies. And I've been thinking a lot recently about plants and the natural world and our relationship with them in the kind of atmosphere that we share. And I found this device in Italy, which is small, like a same size as a phone, really. And you just plug it into the ground near the roots of a tree or a plant, and then you clip another part of it onto the leaf of the plant. And what it does is it records the electromagnetic signals of the plant or the tree.
Oh, wow.
And then it converts it to MIDI, so it converts it to music. So in effect, you can record the sounds that and melodies that plants and trees are making.
Oh wow, that's incredible!
Yeah.
What's it called? Because that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's called a bamboo.
Oh,
There are a couple of variants, but it's called a bamboo. It's made in Italy. So I've just started doing some recording with having the trees melodies as the main instrument.
it's all right. We can include this guy on a podcast
Oh,
because he's been on
we
one.
got an imposter with us.
We have, yes.
How are you, mate?
Yeah,
All right?
hello. You're right, mate.
We can edit this bit out.
Yeah, well, I think we should.
So, yeah. So with the thing about the recording the frequency, that's absolutely fascinating. I see. Look, this is showing how musical we
He's
are.
got to play drums on everything, hasn't he? Here we go. Go on. Then.
So, with regard to the sort of recording of the sort of frequencies and stuff like that,
Yeah.
so you can actually what, use that as a sound bed and then work something out else on that.
Yeah. Actually, as I've got my phone, because I recently, once I discovered this device, well, I crowdfunded it. I crowdfunded for it initially because I just thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to have ambient music, but with the melodies not controlled by man? The melodies are actually produced by a plant.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
How wacky is that? So I thought that could be amazing. So I crowdfunded it, and that was quite an easy. Thanks to I've got quite a good, some very good followers who are really keen on this type of stuff. So I quickly got all the funds I needed, and once I got the device and tried it out in my garden, the first thing that came to me was Westernburt, and there's an arboretum about 40 minutes, which is called Westernburt Arboretum, part of the Forestry Commission, and it's a huge forest, but it's planted with trees going back, centuries. So it's quite a rare collection of trees, and it's always open to the public, and it's very popular. So my first thought was, I wonder if they'd be interested. So I contacted them, and they basically said, yeah, this sounds fascinating. So I went and spent a day there sampling the melodies from some of their trees, and I've compiled a list so far of different ones, and I'm due to go back again to them soon. So just to give you an example, what I do is I send a Bluetooth signal from my receiver into my phone, and I've just got a basic MIDI recording device on my phone that picks up the Bluetooth signal. So because this device only uses a synth sound, every sound you're going to get is a synth. But once I put it into my Mac and my production software, then I can turn it into any sound I want. So for example, this is a redwood tree.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's incredible, because it's almost a scale. There's an odd note in there, so it almost sounds like it could be a raga.
Yeah. You can tailor it, so you can have it chromatic, or you can choose it so it'll only record major notes or things like that.
Oh, okay,
So
okay, all right, I got you. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So this is a yew tree, which was much more lively
and otherworldly, which of course is what a yew tree is in culture.
Yeah. So compared to the redwood we heard earlier, this has got a lot more.
Yeah, that is
a lot more zip to it. This is really lively thing. And then I recorded a different redwood. I recorded a different redwood. Now this redwood was totally different from the first redwood.
Yeah.
Which made me kind of think, well, maybe it's not in as good health as the other one. Because
it's just a different character.
Yeah, maybe. Much more sporadic and lower range as well.
Yeah.
So I'm due to go back there again, probably in a couple of weeks' time. Early November, I've got to go back and take some more samples. And it's very much early days at the moment. But I am finding that every plant and every tree is putting out a different melody. And that's going to change.
Well, this is great, because
yeah,
I've got this little charity called Icaro Music, and of course Icaro is a sacred song of a plant, from the sort of Amazonian thing. Yeah, and of course their thing is that the plant teaches them the song.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you're sort of saying, you know.
Yeah.
So they learned the song from the plant, and I actually think that that's something we would have done in folk music, actually, because there's lots of references to plants in folk music, you know, trees particularly, and birds, you know, trees and birds in folk music, you know, blackthorn bush and all this type of thing.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me is that, okay, let's assume we know this is working, right? Because I haven't made it up, and I was skeptical before I got the device. I thought it's all going to sound the same, but it obviously doesn't. So if you imagine that that's just two trees, imagine what your garden sounds like. If you were to hear what everything is putting out at the same time, it would be a symphony of melody. It would just be It'd be nice to get like 100 of these devices and just wire them all up and just press play on all of them, because it would just be like, you'd be blown away by it.
Yes.
Yes. I'm not doing that anytime yet, but it just makes you realize that there's a lot more out there than you realize, you know, that's around us. I think we just overlook it. And I had no idea really until I tapped into this.
The interesting thing is, even if you just think about the sound of insects and the sounds of birds, you know, if you went back far enough so that, you know, there was no human noise, which of course is almost impossible now to escape it. And then you were in the middle of on the edge of a woodland, which is, you know, more biodiverse than anything else. And then you just sat there in the sun. It must have been so noisy.
Yeah, yeah.
And it would have been like that. It would be sort of like chaotic, but musical.
Yeah, absolutely. I love going to quiet places. I like to kind of escape whenever I can, get down by the sea or by the coast. And I often think about what I'm hearing. I think, right,
yes.
What are you listening to now that the traffic's out of the way? Recently we had the opportunity to have a bit of a holiday. We went up to Isle of Skye for a week.
I saw that you'd done that. I saw it on your Facebook.
Yeah, and we went to this little place which was kind of in the middle of nowhere, but just at the bottom of Skye on the coast, and there was only maybe 5 buildings in this vicinity, and it was a still day, miles away from any traffic. And it was just amazing just to be just in silence. Occasionally you hear a bird singing or something else calling out, and that was it. And it was just such a breath of fresh air, excuse the pun, just to be out of the congestion of modern life, because so many sounds and noises, like phones, like
God, we're absolutely
next door traffic, you know, it's just everywhere, and we are corrupted by all this noise. It's just good just to get back to the raw kind of beginnings, as it were, of nature and sound as it was intended to be before we arrived, you know, and made a mess of everything.
Exactly. Well, that sounds like a place to stop, you know, because that was amazing. Rob.
It's kind of a place to stop, but yeah, it's almost a place to start.
Well, exactly, yeah, because the thing is that it's like, you know, this is a new project of yours, and I think that's, you know, obviously we've put some stuff on the show notes so that people can find out what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. And yes, that was brilliant chat. I really enjoyed that. It's
great. Thank you very much.
Interesting sort of angle on things that you've got there.
Yeah, I love chatting about stuff like this because you end up talking about stuff you don't realize. So as we talk, you end up, it sparks your imagination. You think, I never thought about that.
Well, that's why I do that. That is exactly why I do this podcast.
Great, because you bring stuff out of you that.
And you get different people's take on something, and it just like, yeah, that's interesting. I haven't quite thought of it that way, you know. And it's
exactly.
You know, it's very, very. It's good. It's good for me anyway.
Yeah. Likewise. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, that's good. So all the best, and we got over the gremlins.
Yeah, there's no libelous stuff in there, which is good.
no, and I think maybe we dropped out just at the moment. There might have been. No.
No.
Anyway, that's great. Thanks ever so much, Rob. That's really cool.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, keep in touch then.
Yeah, we'll. Big thanks to Rob. Details are on the show notes. And also stuff about what we're doing with Blues Camp and Icaro, and if you want to contribute to Patreon. So until next time, see you then.